The beginning of chapter 14 starts with Jude talking about how easy it was for her to just waltz her way into the palace of Alflame in her servant's guard, that no one from the goblins, the gentry, the court poet, the seneschal, all of them give her barely a passing look. And she says that I am nothing, no one, a messenger, no more worthy of attention than an animated twig woman or an owl. First off, the no one part is fascinating because that's what her mother told Maddox when he said, what's that? And she says, no one. But Jude just wants to be acknowledged. She wants to be someone. However, by the next book, when she does become a someone and all those people pay very close attention to her, she realizes that maybe I don't want that much attention because it's hindering what she's trying to do. Jude describes Dane's room as being furnished in elaborate velvet, silks, and brocades in these like rich dark shades of scarlet, deep blues, and greens, which these are the colors typically worn by royalty. Look at any royal portrait and you see them in these colors because they are harder to like produce. Like these dyes are richer and more expensive, but also she describes it as being like an overripe fruit, and that could be symbolism showing that his time is up. Even though he hasn't been plucked yet, his time is up, and that maybe the royal line needs a fresher fruit like Cardin. I also love that his furniture is described as having a pattern that looks like a hunt, and it's unclear which of the creatures is hunting the other. On one note, it could be like, you know, how Dane's not entirely sure that Balkan is about to steal the throne from him, and behind Balkan is Maddox ready to steal the throne from him, and behind him is Jude. But on another note, it could just be talking about the relationship between humans and fairies, that they both think that they can be elevated into being the hunter, that they are the ones that aren't being hunted. Like, you know, Jude now thinks that she's elevated. It's interesting that Jude is wondering what Maddox would think of her in this moment, that he would probably be displeased because knights are honorable, and even those who dip their caps in the blood of their enemies. At least that's what Maddox had taught her, but I think that's also part of Maddox's blind spot, and that's why he doesn't expect what Jude does, because I think he assumes everyone will act in a sort of honorable way, that you kind of have to do a big roundabout to backstab someone because of this world where they can't lie and they're bound by their vows, whereas Jude isn't bound and she can lie. It's interesting that Dane says poison may be a coward's weapon, but an effective one, because this poison in question is actually the one that he used. So it's fascinating that he's calling it a coward's weapon, and instead of saying like, oh, it's cunning because it can, you know, most likely not lead back to you, there's less blood, like being his weapon of choice too. Like, it's interesting that he calls it a coward's weapon. I love how complicated Jude's relationship with Maddox is. Actually, all the children, because you see in Stolen Heir of Oak too. But like, she's saying that the one thing about Maddox is that even though he still had her parents' blood on his hands, and you know, all three of the girls were crying as he brought them back into Fairy, he at least didn't enchant their grief away. That he didn't force them. Whereas Dane is forcing her to not reveal any secrets, and she knows that he's being smart, but it's the forcing of it that makes it worse. For most of Jude's life since she entered Fairy, she has felt like an interloper. Like, she hasn't belonged. She doesn't feel like a human anymore, but she's not accepted by the world of Fairy, and more specifically, the gentry world of Fairy. However, the Roach in chapter 14 is pointing out that this is beneficial. She can go unnoticed and hide amongst the human servants, unlike they can, but she also has the upbringing, thanks to Maddox, of kind of blending in with the gentry. At least they don't question her existence being there, unlike, you know, the rest of this group. So I think this is the first time that she's starting to realize that all the things that she thought had her at a disadvantage, she can twist into becoming an advantage. Here's an example of why Jude views Cardin as like the gatekeeper that is preventing her from entering this world. She may not like consciously be aware of this, but she does. And it's exampled here with when the ghost says, if Prince Dane says you're a part of the Court of Shadows, then you are. Try not to be much of a disappointment and we'll have your back. So basically someone higher up said, all right, you're here. The rest of us are just going to go along with it because he has the power. Once again, we're seeing why Jude does not want to marry her way into the world, because she thinks you're very easily could be kicked back out, that you won't be fully accepted in. You'll still be considered like someone straddling your way into it. Because she says, I'm not sure that I wouldn't have preferred some ordeal, some way to prove myself to like the Court of Shadows. She thinks if she proves herself, proves her worthiness, then they can't argue her placement here. Remember back in chapter 10 when Dane is first approaching Jude to work for him? He says, desire is an odd thing. As soon as it's stated, it transmutes. If we receive golden thread, we desire the golden needle. And it's already coming to fruition in chapter 14. Because she receives the golden thread, which is being accepted by this group of fairies, this Court of Shadows that works for Dane. This is pretty high up. She has some power. But it's not enough because she thinks, I like to believe that even though I was drugged and nearly murdered at school yesterday, I am able to put that behind me today. I'm fine. But if I can't laugh, maybe I'm not so fine after all. It's not enough. For her, she needs the golden needle now, which is being accepted by Cardan. Okay, I love these annotations from Holly Black because, like, right here we have a line from Locke that's, "Nothing there would be the same without you." And Holly Black writes, "He figured out how to work in the line he wanted to say, even without the setup he was hoping for." In which one, it makes me think of Mr. Bennett making fun of Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice when he says, "Do you rehearse these compliments or do they just come to you in the spur of the moment?" But also, it's pointing out that, like, Locke plans these things. And, like, I think the reason why he does end up with Taryn is that she follows through with the setup. Like, she's a good compliment for this part of him. Whereas Jude, it just goes over her head. She's like, no. When Jude begs Taryn to at least tell me that he is kind, tell me that you love him and that he's promised to be good to you, Taryn says he's a fairy. They don't love the way we do. She at least is aware of this. She is very realistic, and the reason she's jealous of Jude is not because she loves Locke, it's because that is her security line. That is the one chance she has of being accepted into this world, because you can either marry or have an exceptional, like, gift, and she plans on marrying, and she doesn't think she has any other options. At least no one has, you know, shown up, and Locke's a great option, and she's terrified of losing it. When the dressmaker comes, Jude notes that even Vivi is drawn to run her fingers over the cloth, an absent smile on her face. Despite trying to fight against her nature, because she doesn't want to be a part of fairy, she wants to be a part of the human world, she cannot leave it behind. It's so natural for her. And she does love the wonder. I think if it wasn't for Maddox, she would willingly accept this world, but she's fighting against her nature. One of the reasons why I love Jude is that Holly Black doesn't make her main characters smarter than they are, that they know exactly what other characters are thinking and feeling, that Jude makes wrong assumptions. And we see that when, like, Arinia calls Jude out saying, "Who were you thinking about with a dreamy expression on your face?" Vivi laughs again. Taryn doesn't, probably because she thinks I'm an idiot. As a reader, we later learned that that was false, but it was an understandable assumption from Jude, and I love that. Here's another example of fairies not deluding themselves and being very upfront, being very apparent of who and what they are, because their society is set up in a slightly self-centered way, where, like, yes, they may be kind, but they're not altruistic. And, like, you see that when, like, they don't like thank yous, that the fairies don't believe in dismissing gratitude with a few words. They believe in debts and bargains. Basically, they will help out another, but they expect payment from it. So then the person doesn't feel guilty, like someone has something up over them, hanging over you. This imbalance of power is basically set up in the society that you can pay it back almost automatically. It's set up from the get-go. When Jude thinks, "Ever since I staggered home through the woods in my underwear, I have been trying to feel nothing about what happened. I am afraid that if I begin to feel, I won't be able to bear it. I am afraid that the emotion will be like a wave sucking me under." And I think this kind of explains her going forward, because in that moment, she was so close to death. I think more so than any other moment, and that's scary. And I think it explains why she subtly poisons herself going forward, which, yeah, it's an assignment from Dane, but it also is her taking control back in her life. Because she, at least, if she does this, is getting rid of that avenue for the others of harming or potentially killing her, that they can't do it that way, at least. But also, she grew up with Maddox, and he's not exactly known for talking about your feelings. Slowly, we were watching Jude crack and break, and all those emotions that she's been suppressing for years bubble up and just knock the pot, like the lid off the pot. Because for the longest time as a human, she has been forced to almost be neutral, to suppress everything that she thinks and feels. And now she's just had enough, where, like, right now she is yelling at Arinia when she takes Oak away and goes, "Why don't you trust me? I am not the monster." Because to Jude, Oak has more power than her, but yet Arinia sees her as a monster, though in Arinia's defense, Jude has the potential of being as monstrous as Oak does. Thank you so much for this comment, because when I made the video where I actually talked about the chapter, I'm more so focused about Jude's mother being the one that read it to them, not the fact that the book was introduced to us by it being owned by Cardan. And that's interesting because Holly Black could have very easily just had Jude rediscover her old copy amongst her old possessions while looking for something else. But instead she had it owned by Cardan. I think that's interesting for a variety of reasons. But first, just introducing the book of Alice in Wonderland within this world, it's perfect because of the strong parallels between Wonderland and Fairy. They both have quirks, they both have strange social constructs and, like, hierarchies, and their use of language is important in both these worlds. There are numerous literary papers just talking about how Alice in Wonderland does a play on words and puns and all that, and we see throughout the series that Cardan is a master wordsmith. Within this very same chapter that Jude discovers the book, she watches Balkan and Cardan practice their sword play, and Balkan critiques Cardan, saying, "Why don't you take your sword play more seriously?" And Cardan responds with, "Then why do they call it sword play?" Like, we just continue to see him use his words like amazingly, so you can assume that maybe he learned some of his skills from reading Alice in Wonderland. But in addition to that, you can maybe argue that Cardan learned to be empathetic towards humans thanks to reading these books. There are numerous studies pointing out that children that grew up reading Harry Potter have grown up to be more empathetic. So reading can influence your outlook on life. And for Cardan, he could have very easily have been callous towards humans because he predominantly grew up in Balkan's home, and that his home is notorious for their misuse of human servants. And yet Cardan found ways of helping these human servants find their way home. And you could argue he may have started doing that after reading Alice in Wonderland, because Alice's main goal throughout that journey in Wonderland, and Wonderland is very similar to Fairy, is to find her way home. And so he does that. However, Jude befuddles him because she strongly does not want to go home. She wants to stay in Fairy, in Wonderland, and he can't quite understand why when in that book, that's all Alice wants. That's all these other humans want. Why doesn't Jude want it? And that might explain why Jude found that piece of paper lodged within Alice in Wonderland of Cardan just writing her name, God knows how many times. So he might have been just trying to figure out, why doesn't Jude want to go back? And so he's just writing Jude, 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 Jude. So yeah, these are just things that come to mind initially when I'm thinking about it. But thank you for this question, because that was really fun to dig into a little bit more of why Holly Black made it that Cardan was the one that owned this book and why Jude found it on him. And I think that plays into why he's empathetic towards not only other humans, but towards Jude herself. So, thank you.
Locke's an asshole. Well, I'm reading Jude recap what her week's been like, that, she's been training the Court of Shadows and Maddox, but at school, Locke continues his flirtation. He sits with Taryn and me when we take our lunch, spread out in a blanket watching the sunset. You're sitting in between the two girls you're wooing. Cardan's probably just fuming over on his blanket, but Taryn knows. She knows. And she's putting up with this because she sees him as her only ticket into this world because she doesn't have a line of suitors. She doesn't know she'll ever get anyone else that will offer her marriage because she thinks that's the only way she can enter this world. Understandable, but just Jude has no idea. It's over her head. And Locke's just probably thriving under this. This is probably his best moment. Ugh. But again, while I hate Locke in this instance, it is within his nature. Because I don't remember exactly what type of fairy he is, but he's the type that likes to seduce others. His mother was this type. Oak is this type. That plays a role in Oak's story, The Stolen Heir. But, it's an itch that they have to satisfy. It's within their nature. Just the same as Maddox needs to dip his red cap in blood. They kind of have a harder time resisting. They have to satisfy that itch. I love that they all know, despite Cardan trying to hide the fact that he likes Jude, they all know. And you can tell when Jude overhears Narcia saying to Locke, "Are you enjoying yourself? Cardan won't forgive you for what you're doing with her." I wonder if that explains why Valerian tries to kill Jude, possibly in this chapter, I can't remember, but the tower, because we know the least about Valerian, so I have been unable to figure out why he has been picking on her the most. But I wonder if, based off what Nasia is saying, they know. And so I wonder if he's trying to help Cardan out by getting rid of the thing that's ruining him. Yeah, now I'm definitely thinking that Valerian's doing this because he thinks that he's helping Cardan. Because when he tries to glamour Jude to call down to Cardan, tell him he's won, then jump from the tower, besides maybe getting some entertainment of watching a mortal jump out of a tower, it doesn't benefit him. It's trying to get her to tell Cardan he's won, not Valerian's won. So I think he thinks that by destroying the thing that's been annoying Cardan, that's standing in his way, Cardan will give him a prize or praise him for this. And when Cardan doesn't, that's when he starts to get really annoyed and wants to take it out on Jude. And that's why a little bit later in the story, he appears in Jude's room to unalive her. A couple of times already, I've talked about how I think that the fairies view humans, how humans view animals. And you see that right here when Jude thinks, "I am struck by the word species, by the idea that he thinks I am something entirely else, like an ant or a dog or a deer." While it does hurt when Jude thinks,
I tell myself I don't mind that she left me. It wasn't her job to stick out her neck, especially when she made it abundantly clear that she didn't want any part of this fight. Because she's recognizing within the world of fairy, what she's been learning to do throughout most of her life here, that they're a little bit more self-centered. They do think about themselves first unless there's something to benefit. It makes sense within this world. And Taryn's just one step closer to being like that. Whereas Jude, however, is noble. She will protect her family. If the roles were reversed, she would have protected Taryn, and that makes her more human. I can't explain why, but like I love and I laugh at Carden saying to Taryn, "Oh, go already. You're boring us both." But like I wonder if he knows this also dig at Taryn, because Locke probably is already noticing that Taryn is boring as compared to Jude, because she is not creating as many stories as Jude would. Okay, once again, the annotations from Holly Black in the LitJoy copy, so amazing, because she says here, because Carden considered so much of what he did instead to be a game. He didn't understand or anticipate the people around him were entirely in earnest. But the funny thing is that in the next book, the roles are reversed. He is pretty much being earnest with Jude, but she doesn't believe him because she thinks he's still playing a game. Okay, so like literally Jude's looking at Taryn, who's talking to Locke, and then she's watching Locke, and Carden looks and sees that she's looking at Locke, and he like has like sniffs, like he smells something that offended him. And I'm literally thinking of this TikTok sound that's, "Don't look at him, look at me. He's not gonna help you." Like I'm imagining Carden saying that. When Locke says about Carden, "Oh, he'd like to make you believe he's our leader, but it's more that Narcia likes power, I like dramatics, and Valerian likes violence. Carden can provide us with all three, or at least excuses for all three." Basically, they have a very give and take relationship. Carden's hierarchy and his place in it gives them a safety net to live out their worst instincts, to really truly be themselves. And with it, they in return make Carden feel like he has a little bit of power and prestige, because he does not have that from the rest of his family in the rest of his life. But obviously, Carden doesn't have his friends' loyalty. However, true loyalty, I think, in this world is very rare, because this, once again, is a self-centered kind of stylized society. So it's always, what do I get out of this arrangement? What bargain or deal can we make? I will follow whoever can give me a better bargain. And we see that time and time again throughout this series. I think Locke, well, more specifically, his mother beautifully summarizes the relationship between fairies and mortals, because she said, "Our world will grow stagnant without yours." Fairies are immortal, so they hold on to their traditions, and it's archaic with their swords and style of dress and all these things, because they have such a long lifespan. They don't feel the rush to advance, and they like their traditions because they grew up with that traditions. It's not past people's traditions as much, whereas mortals have a mayfly lifespan. So we're trying to make advances as fast as we can within our lifespans, and like other species that have shorter lifespans, they genetically mutate faster. And what Locke's mother is trying to say is that they would have gone stagnant, probably died out if it wasn't for mortals helping to breed, but also it would eventually grow boring without some mortals coming in to bring advancements in music or, you know, their weaponry and stuff like that. When Locke says to Jude, "You're not the way they said you would be," at first I thought it was Carden or Narcia trying to like dissuade him from going after mortals, but now I'm starting to wonder if the "they" is Taryn trying to dissuade him from pursuing Jude, being like, yeah, romance isn't gonna get her, but he's surprisingly is working. Okay, I love this detail. So she sees Carden at Locke's party, obviously already drunk, and a horned girl kissing his neck, and it's the horned girl because you know what Jude's signature hairstyle is? Horns. So lately I've been doing a literary analysis of the Cruel Prince series as I reread it. Please go check out my other videos. But in this one, I want to talk about how I am a Taryn apologist. I know everyone hates her, and I get infuriated by some of the things that she does some of the times. But I just want to point out why I'm a Taryn apologist. And it has to do with, in the beginning of the book, Jude points out that there are pretty much only two ways for humans to be accepted into the world of fairy, which is the goal for both Jude and Taryn. They want to be accepted. And it's either to marry into it or it's to have an exceptional craft. Now, when Taryn looks at Jude, she's like, she's pretty good at her sword and Maddox would help her. So she'll probably earn her way in that way. I'm not good at that. I don't have a craft. So I have to marry in. It's my only option. And so when Locke appears, it's her safety line. It's that line that means that she will be safe if she just follows through with this, because she doesn't have a line of suitors waiting for her. And so when, you know, he starts playing with her
she goes along with it because she's like, it'll be worth it in the end. Even when he then ropes in Jude and it hurts, she goes along with it because she has no other options and she needs that security, because from the prologue, we see that their entire lives got ripped away in an instant. Taryn knows that can happen. For Jude, it means that you can make it into something better because she likes kind of the world that she's living in a little bit more than the mortal one. That's why she resists going back to the mortal world. For Taryn, she is terrified of something like that happening again. So she knows if she can secure her place in Fairy, if she can marry into it, she might be safe. She might be secure. And that's all she wants. So yes, her pettiness at times is frustrating. Like, her irrationally being angry at Jude, even though Jude is oblivious. But at the same time, as someone with a sister, I understand that sibling pettiness. For instance, I was so frustrated when I was younger when my sister got a Facebook at the same time as me, even though I'm 3 years older, and I was begging my parents to let me get a Facebook. And this is when Facebook was still new. That's how old I am. But, it wasn't her fault that my parents let her. But I was mad at her. It's just that age. It's sibling pettiness. And yes. So going back to what I was saying, there's two ways of getting into this world. And for Taryn, she thinks this is her only option, is to marry in. And Locke is giving her that option. She has no other, ones waiting for her. And she's afraid if she loses this option, she'll have nothing. There would be no other ones that would come up down the line. So I understand why she does what she does in this book and a little bit later in some of the other books. So that's why I'm a Taryn apologist. This is one of the reasons why I love Jude, because right now when she thinks, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to wake up in a boy's house and talk to the girl with whom he had a relationship. Because this is something I guarantee we've all went through at some point in our lives, where we feel so inexperienced with some aspect of our lives, usually with love. So then we try to act like we're experienced because we don't want the other person to know, but we're really just bullshitting our way through because for some reason it's embarrassing when it really shouldn't be, because it's not natural. You have to learn through experience. And I love this moment because I'm sitting here like, girl, I totally understand. It's relatable and I love this detail. Wait, girl, why aren't you questioning this? Why is Carden sitting in the back right next to Taryn? Why is he sitting next to Taryn? Why? I love this little tidbit of foreshadowing where the lecturer in class talks about how Queen Maeve bargained with Wildfire to make the crown, and it's only to pass on her descendants. It would be tricky to get it by force. Now, Balkan tries to get it by force, but obviously backfires and he ends up unaliving the rest of his siblings except for Carden. But Carden also ends up getting it slightly by force because Jude makes a deal where she can then force him to do anything at her will, but she's a little bit more cunning. And as the lecturer says, it would be tricky, not impossible. Once again, my sweet darling oblivious Jude, not asking the right questions, because she, when Taryn approaches her and says, where were you? She said, I went to Locke's house. There was a party. I stayed. We kissed. That was all. That's all she said. But Taryn says, I just think that sleeping in someone's room in someone's bed is more than kissing. How do you know that detail? I love this change in attitude with Jude from the first time she went to Hollow Hell. Because the first time she went, all right, if Balkan gets me, most likely he'll just send me back to Maddox. But now she goes, given what I saw with Carden, I am not at all confident I could endure what Balkan would do to me if he caught me. Basically, he's doing that to his own blood brother. What would he do to me? A mortal, too. This moment with the servant girl is a glimpse at Jude's true nature, and at its core, she's human. Despite rebelling against that, she is human because she has human sensibilities where she is noble, and she's doing this altruistically because she might lose everything that she's gained with Dane because it's the right thing to do. And that goes against everything in this world that she's trying to be a part of. They're slightly self-centered. They would only have done something like this if they got something out of it. That being said, she definitely could have handled this better. She was a little rough, commanding her don't cry. She's not being sympathetic of this girl who just forcibly was woken up in a strange world and has no idea what is happening. She's kind of handling it the way Maddox probably would handle it. I love Vivi, despite being a fairy herself, actually does a better job at comforting Sophie than Jude does. And it's also interesting that Vivi says, don't worry, you won't have to see as much of, magic. You'll be back in the mortal world, the daylight world, the normal world. To Vivi, the mortal world is the normal world. During this experience, we're seeing Jude assume what she likes on other people. So she doesn't like glamorous because she feels like she loses her freedom of choice. Whereas In this moment, it probably would have been better if Vivi did glamour and knock out Sophie. It might have been easier on her mind, and she probably wouldn't have stuffed her pockets with rocks and thrown herself into the ocean. This line here where Jude thinks, I hadn't been listening, I hadn't wanted to hear, I just wanted to save her, is a representation of one of Jude's flaws, that she sometimes gets so wrapped up in her own view of the world that she ignores others. Once again, we're seeing how little fairies value mortals, because when Dane comes to reprimand Jude, she automatically assumes it's about her stealing a mortal servant from Balkan and then it backfiring, the mortal dying. But no, he's coming to reprimand her for stabbing Valerian, a child of the gentry. And one, I kind of understand, because like Valerian went to go command Jude, and after taking her rowan berries, it should have worked, but because of Dane's guys, whatever, it didn't, and that might, lead him to the trail of Dane, what Dane's up to. However, I don't know how Dane would have found out about this, but in general, it's him putting the value of a gentry child who was just injured over the death of a mortal. When Jude stabs her hand, it is a physical representation of how far she will go. However, she's still doing it to please someone else. Previously it was for Maddox, right now it's for Dane. So she's not doing this for herself fully. It's also showing her level of desperation to be a part of this world. She is willing to stab her own hand to be a part of this world. When Jude says our favorite line, instead of being afraid, I could become something to fear. Within the society, I believe that it's set up where it's a hierarchy where the people at the top are not only powerful, but they're also ruthless. That's why red caps are towards the top, but they're not at the top because they don't have the same power that a fae does, but a fae is equally ruthless. And Jude is trying to emulate that. Like, she's trying to be as ruthless as they are. That's why she stabs her own hand. However, Holly Black puts in her annotations, in many ways, the big questions of the books is how far Jude would go to not have to be afraid. She thinks if she can climb up in the hierarchy, she'll have less people to be afraid of. Unfortunately, in the later parts of the series, we see that her and Carter are at the top of the pyramid. They're king and seneschal, but yet they're still terrified because all the people below them trying to overthrow them. When Dane tells Jude, do not reveal your skill of a blade, do not reveal your mastery over glamour, do not reveal all that you can do, show your power by appearing powerless. This is exactly what Carter is already doing, lowering people's expectations. Jude, on the other hand, because she is so low on the totem pole and they expect her to be, she is more flashy, more in the face, like, look what I can do. I am not worthless. However, I think she does kind of take what Dane says to heart, because she does alter how she does things going forward. Arenia's words to Jude is interesting because she tells her, do not aspire above your station, which that's pretty much what Jude is doing. She won't admit it, but she is. She wants to be a little bit higher in the hierarchy, so she'll be a little bit safer in her eyes. But Arenia also says, I'm only thinking of your future. Those close to the throne are seldom truly close to anyone else. A mortal girl would have even fewer allies. And that is true. We see that happening throughout book 2 in The Wicked King. One of the reasons why I love Jude is that she feels like a realistic, teenager. Despite the circumstances, she's being an obstinate teenager right now because kids and teenagers push against boundaries. That's just how we develop and grow up. But, when Arenia is trying to tell her to be wary of court life, that, when there's a lot of power concentrated in one place, there's plenty of scraps to fight over, you wouldn't be well suited to it. And Jude goes, what makes you think that? Maybe it would suit me just fine. And it's like, no, she's trying to give you words of warning, not, throwing the gauntlet down for you to prove me wrong. When Jude ends up fighting against Valerian and, killing him in self-defense, it's interesting that she never calls out for Maddox, because Maddox could have done, got rid of him very easily and would have been furious at Valerian for, attacking Jude in his own home. However, it's also kind of proving that Jude is stepping out of Maddox's shadow. Not only does she defend herself, but she's taking care of this problem without, informing him of it. It probably is for the best that Jude killed Valerian despite her mental health, because if Maddox had done it, he would have either, one, pushed it under the rug because he wouldn't have wanted it to ruin his coronation plans, but that would have made Jude feel like he didn't care about her, or two, he would have ranted in rage to the court because of Valerian honoring him, coming into his own home to kill one of his wards, and others would have been like, she's a mortal, who cares? And that would have probably sparked a war, which is probably exactly what Maddox would have wanted. And we finally got our favorite quote, if I cannot be better than them, I will become so much worse. And these are words that she lived by, and it becomes her motto. Oh, interesting. So I totally thought that when Valerian cursed her, it worked because it did seem like Jude always had blood staining her hands and Depp was always her companion. But Holly Black put in her annotations, good thing he didn't get it all out. Had he, it would have worked. So I guess it wasn't fate drawing these things to have happened. It was her own personal choices and actions. Jude unaliving Valerian is a complicated knot because you can view it in so many different ways. You can argue that this scene almost mirrors the scene of when Maddox unalived their mother. They poor attempts at trying to stop it and then instinctively killing someone. Or at the same time, you could argue that Jude is once again pushing against his expectations, proving him wrong, being like, look, I am a killer, I can do this. Or at the same time, you can say that she's realizing that she stabbed Valerian, that didn't stop him or scare him away, so I guess the only other option for me to do is kill him. The moment that Maddox unalived their mother, the tracks that Jude and her sisters were on changed. The trajectory of their life had changed. And then it did it once again when Jude kills Valerian. Because everything that she does going forward, she's a little bit more cocky. A little bit more like, I've killed someone. So yeah, you should definitely be afraid of me now. I love when Jude asks the ghost, do you think things will be different after Prince Dane becomes the High King? And the ghost pretty much says, no, it's going to be the same as ever, because I think the ghost sees this slight childish hope coming from her, especially as a human, thinking that things will be completely different now. And it's like, no, it won't. It's going to be the same thing, different guy sitting on the throne. But Jude asking that question is still showing that she is putting her fate in someone else's hands. She has not fully taken it into her own just yet, and I don't think she does until the coronation, when, you know, Carden's entire family is ended, except for him and Balkan. I think that's the moment where she's finally realizing that if I want something to be different, I need to be involved. I need to make this happen. I love this line because it perfectly summarizes Jude and her change in this story. Before, I never knew how far I would go. Now I believe I have the answer. I will go as far as there to go. I will go way too far. I love this moment of contemplation from Jude because it's going back to the nature versus nurture element, which is Jude wondering if it's her messed up childhood and the way that Maddox raised her, that he nurtured her into being capable of unaliving people, of bloodshed. And we see something similar within Stolen Heir of Oak. We learn there that he doesn't play fight. If he fights, it's to the death, and he learned that from Maddox. I love this conversation between Jude and the ghost because it's him kind of popping this bubble of this lie that she has been fed for most of her life, that mortals are incompetent, because, you know, he knows that she's been poisoning herself and says, why? And she says, being mortal means I have to try harder. And the ghost makes a face saying, someone's really sold you a bill of goods. Plenty of mortals are better at plenty of stuff than the folk. Why do you think we steal them away? Also, when Jude says being mortal means I have to try harder, I like that line from a feminist standpoint, because you could easily replace mortal with a woman. Being a woman means I have to try harder to be able to get to the same places that men have. I love this description of Arenia for the coronation, because she says, Arenia looks like a rose in bloom beside him, wearing a massive necklace of rough-cut emeralds at her throat, large enough to nearly count as armor. And I love it's showing that the jewelry is her armor. Appearing in this very feminine way is her armor. It's to be underestimated by them while secretly manipulating in the background. And I appreciate this angle because that is one way of getting what you want. It's the way that Taryn's doing it. It's the way that, like, Alison Hightower in House of the Dragons is doing things. Maddox is such an interestingly complex person that while, yes, he did unalive their parents and stole them away to Fairy, he still kind of gave them the space that they needed to grow up into their own persons. Maddox understands that Vivi is only staying around for Taryn and Jude and still doesn't force her to become his, true daughter. That let her be whoever she wants to be. And same when it comes to Taryn and Jude. While, yes, he does become like a father figure to them, and he does teach them how to survive in this world, he does see that, Jude and Taryn are different people, that Taryn doesn't want to continue her swordplay education like Jude, and he lets her grow into who she is. Lets her, adopt Arenia's skill. And while Jude may obviously be his favorite, he loves them all equally, and he still also doesn't let Jude and Taryn their heritage by gifting them things that their birth father made. I do love that Holly Black has that every time Jude eats around Maddox, there's some like bloody meat involved, and we don't see that in any other instance that she is eating, like when she's just eating with Taryn or at any other place. When Jude talks about how like she's, worried about dancing because she's not good at it, and thinks about, what the Ghost, Roach, and Bomb are going to be doing to safeguard Dane, but she hasn't been given instructions. And it made me realize that she's blind to the fact that Dane is using her, and not the way that she thinks he is. She thinks that he's using her loopholes for being a human to benefit him and help him out, and that it will elevate her, not realizing that I think he's using her as a kind of bargaining chip against Maddox if he ever needed it. Holly Black spends a paragraph talking about the candles in the court, or at least like Jude describing the candles. And Jude describes the wax looking like termite-eaten wood, and then describes all the places that they are atop branches, they line the walls, and clump in tight arrangements on stones lighting up the hill. And I was trying to figure out why I spend so much time, and it hit me. I think it's supposed to show that this place is rotting, because usually when wood is eaten by termites, that means the wood is rotting, and I think it's supposed to show that this court is rotting. When Aurelia puts a leash on Oak, your initial thoughts are going to probably go to how parents in our society put their kids on leashes, but I think it's also to represent that they almost kind of view him like a pet, like an object, that they don't take Oak's wants and desires into consideration when they are using him as a bargaining chip to gain the throne. I love this line, "We escape into the crowd and moments later we are drowning in it," because normally when Taryn and Jude go to court, they are hidden in their like a little balcony above water, but now they're throwing themselves in the midst of it and they are drowning in it, because I think the only true way to really be a part of fairy is if you drown in it, just like that human servant who stuffed her pockets and threw herself in the ocean. Jude's pretty sure a little bit later she sees her amongst the underseas grouping, and apparently they like to reanimate drowned humans, but that means that this human servant is officially part of fairy. When Jude and Locke are dancing together, Locke is testing her. He's also kind of like setting her up to see if she will follow through with his idea of how this story is going to go. Because previously when he was trying to be romantic, Jude was like, this isn't serious. This is just for fun. Like, we're not here for the long term. I'm just here for the good time. But he's trying to see if he can push her towards creating the story that he thinks is going to happen after he proposes to Taryn, which is that he thinks that the two of them will fight over him. And so he's trying to prompt her, going, would you, love me enough to give me up? Would you weep over me? And she's like, if you're hurt. And he goes, no, what if I hurt you? She goes, I would just hurt you right back. And his steps falter, and you see this is the moment that he's like, oh, that was not what I was anticipating. One of my favorite lines is when Carden interrupts Locke and Jude dancing. He goes, time to change partners. Oh, did I steal your line? And like, we know that he's referencing about like Locke dating Taryn and Jude, but it goes completely over Jude's head. Well, actually, if it's your first time reading it, it goes completely over your head too. But I love the pettiness of it, and I love also it's him kind of taking that first step of like disregarding everything he was doing before. Like, he's no longer keeping his distance from Jude. He doesn't care. He can't do it anymore. Holly Black is so good at like putting these like almost throwaway lines. Like, they make sense in the moment, but they're also foreshadowing, because like this moment between Carden and Jude where Jude says, go ahead, insult me. His eyebrows go up. I don't take commands from mortals. Boy, you spoke too soon. So we get this line from Carden when he says, you really hate me, don't you? His smile growing. And I think he's torn in this moment, because part of him's like, oh great, she hates me, so hopefully my feelings towards her will die off, because this is never going to happen because she hates me. But the other part of him is probably devastated, because at the bottom of the section, Holly Black puts an annotation that says, from here on, all Carden does is drink. The other reason why Carden is drunk throughout this night is because he needs to be numb just to survive it. After tonight, he has no more chances of changing his father's mind to acknowledge and love him. It's over. His father is going to die not caring for him, and the rest of his family doesn't care about him either. We see that when they're all up on the dais, and they don't even care to go find where Carden is until he is needed. The interesting thing about this ceremony, where Dane is standing there naked in front of the crowd, and the other courts come forth, swear their fealty, and then, paint swirls of ink on his skin, is that this is just a ceremony. It's not needed, because when Carden's crowned, he's fully clothed, and all the other courts just verbalize out loud that they swear themselves to his court. It just hit me a little bit more, the delusion that Jude had that Dane was going to make the world better, like she said in the last chapter, and Ghost responds with, no, he's not, it's going to be the same. And it is that, because when he made Jude his spy, he even told her it was going to be a private secret thing. He was never going to publicly announce her immortal being, like, elevating her to the public. It was never going to change. She was still going to be at the bottom. Whereas Cardan does. He elevates her to stand beside him and says, I don't care if she's mortal. I value her and her opinions. Once again, Maddox is such an interestingly complex character because he is about to unalive Dane and start a coup. And this is within his nature. He is a redcap. They like bloodshed. But he doesn't want his family to see it. And he almost successfully gets them escorted away to not see the side of him. Unfortunately, Jude witnesses it. I do love that when Falcon unalives his father, instead of dying like the others, he turns into like a burst of red moths. And we see in the next book that Falcon is haunted by red moths following him. It is interesting that all of Cardan's sisters are wearing blue dresses. And we later learn that the dress that Jude is wearing, which is like a blue ombre dress, is something that he sent to her. Like, he's dressing her like his sisters, like royalty. Throughout this entire massacre, Jude keeps wanting to help, like the ghosts and the royal family, but she is hemmed in, she is stuck, she is unable to. And in this moment, I think she feels her most powerlessness and inability to help. And she wants to help make this world better to survive in, because this is the world that she wants to be a part of. And so she doesn't want someone like Falcon in charge. And I think that's part of the reason why she starts working towards putting Cardan on the throne. The night of the botched coronation is a pivotal moment in both Jude and Cardan's journeys. For both of them, their lives are going to divide between their lives before this night and the lives after this night. And for Jude, it's her realizing that for her to get truly what she really wants, she's going to have to be in charge of her own life and her own destiny. She can no longer hope for someone more powerful like Maddox or Dane to give it to her, to make the world better in the way that she wants it to be. If she wants this truly, she needs to do it herself. She needs to fight for herself. And that's what she starts to do. For Cardan, it's him realizing that he can no longer live the way that he has been living. Though he does try to hang on to that old lifestyle, that old way, even though it never truly made him happy. But change is hard. But for him, it's realizing also that while his power and status did give him some benefits, it also made him extremely vulnerable as he saw his brother unalive the rest of his family line. So he doesn't want to be near power. However, as the series continues, thanks to Jude, he has to learn also that he needs to take control over his own life. That for him to be happy, he can no longer depend on someone else to do it for him. And so he has to work within making his own actions and also with the power that he has at his hands to achieve this. Chapter 22 starts, and actually part 2 starts, with Jude saying, I am a child again, hiding under a table with the revel spinning around above me. And it's showing that her and Cardan are still kids. When things got too real, too scary, they hide like kids, hoping someone else will fix the problems of the world. And they quickly realize that that's not going to be the case, that they kind of have to take the future and their own fates in their own hands. As Jude is reeling with what just happened underneath the table, she's thinking, I thought I could not be shocked by death, but there was just so much of it. An embarrassing, ridiculous excess. And this is the moment where she veers away from Maddox, where she does not follow Maddox's path. While yes, she does adhere to some of his lessons with strategy, everything she does is to avoid more bloodshed. Even in Cardan's drunken haze and everyone is looking for him, he is concerned for Jude. Because Jude is under the table crawling, and somehow Cardan sees her, or at least recognizes the dress, lifts the tablecloth and grabs her and says, you're mortal. He is concerned for her well-being. I think I might be Jude, because I've read Cardan saying, crouching in the dirt, typical of your kind, but far beneath my dignity. And like that last bit makes characters automatically my book boyfriends. Like, I never know if I want to laugh or punch him in the face, but I love it either way. And literally Jude says right afterwards, he expects I'm going to laugh too. I don't. I ball up my fist and punch him in the stomach. Once again, we're seeing Jude react in a human way, in a noble, altruistic way, whereas Faye is a little bit more selfish. If they had saw Cardan, their first thought would have been, how can I use him to benefit myself? Whereas for Jude, she corrals him under the table to come with her to keep him safe, even if she wouldn't admit it to herself. The whole using him to bargain with doesn't come till a little bit later. When Jude says, I must keep it together, I can't lose it now, not where Cardan will see. To her, Cardan still is the gatekeeper to this world, unofficially. To her, because she interacts with him the most, he is the thing standing in her way of being accepted into the world of fairy. And if he sees her breaking down, then maybe he won't allow her through. In this moment where Jude says, it's disturbing seeing him like this, behaving as though he might have emotions. It's the first of many cracks, shattering this impression she has of Cardan and who he is. Finally getting past her prejudiced beliefs and how he presents himself to the world to finally see that he's a scared, unloved boy. Once again, we're getting another glimpse at this strange, complicated relationship between Jude and Maddox, because in the beginning of this chapter, Jude doesn't even want to go home. She doesn't want to see him after his betrayal. But yet, when Cardan says something similar, that they should have never trusted him, but your mother discovered that a long time ago, Jude narrows her eyes and orders him to crawl. Like only she can, ridicule Maddox. When Jude orders Cardan to crawl, the corner of his mouth lifts. You first, he says. And I think in part, it's still showing that Jude is already taking that step towards taking complete control over her life and all the actions within it, whereas Cardan still is a little bit of a follower. It's going to take him a little bit more time before reaching the same place that Jude is starting to reach. However, it could also just be that he wants to look at her ass. The mirroring of the scene. Oh my god, so when they're crawling underneath the table, they reach the end. Cardan stands up and offers a hand to help her up. And she says, maybe Cardan would say he was doing it for the benefit of onlookers, but we both know he's mocking me. And we both know that's not true. That's just your belief. And we see this happen again in the next book when Cardan proposes marriage to her. She goes basically, why are you mocking me? Oh my god, when Cardan points out that they shouldn't want Maddox's knights to recognize Jude because then they might, then pay more attention to who she's with and recognize Cardan. So she takes her hair, like the braids of her hair down and lets it fall wild in her face. And Cardan goes, you look. And I think it's in this moment, it's a different version of Jude. He's always seen the braided, uptight, presentable Jude. This is a more natural, unguarded version of her almost. I love this moment where they're trying to get past the knights. Is our first glimpse at seeing Cardan use his words to get out of situations. And he lies without lying. Every word that he says has truth behind it, but the way he strings them together helps present a lie to get him and Jude past these knights. And I just love this version of him. At the bottom of this page, we have an annotation from Holly Black which says, Cardan has never had to try like this before. He didn't know he could do any of this. And it's kind of like that he's pushed up against a wall and he's finding his, what he's truly capable of because he never had to find out. And he's realizing that he can be self-reliant and get himself out of situations with his own way without using a sword like his brother. Also, this is making me realize that him and Jude are so much more alike than they will admit, because Jude early in the book says, no, I'm more into annoying others and eating the consequences. And that's kind of what Cardan's been doing for most of his life up to this point too. When Jude says, I let him keep his possessive grip on my arm, guiding me. And I'm like, don't you see? Oh my god, he's worried for you more than himself. Poor sweet darling Cardan. He is probably getting severe whiplash of his opinion for Jude. And so are we, because up to this point, she's very human-like, very noble. But then all of a sudden, her using Cardan is proving to be more Fae-like, using him for her own advantage. Because up to this point, Cardan, yes, assumed she was lowly as a human, but then she was doing noble acts such as defending Taryn in the river and stealing one of Balkan's human servants to bring her back to her world. And then also, helping each other out, get away from the chaos in the throne room. But then all of a sudden, she's holding a knife to his throat. And he's like, oh, you're feeling left out of the slaughter. Oh, I misjudged you. You're just like Maddox. You're just like everyone else in this world, using me for your benefit. And that's why he also says, I'm not going to let you just parade me out here. And I think if she didn't do this, Jude probably could have got him to do whatever she wanted. But because she is holding a knife to his throat, he then views her like how he views everyone else. And he has his guard up against her now. Up to this point, Jude has always, unknowingly, viewed Cardan as the gatekeeper to the world of fairy. She's never really interacted with other royalty, so it's Cardan who's the most powerful person within their circle that has been influencing others on whether or not she is accepted in this world. And it's even more so true now. As she points it out, she says, so believe me when I threaten you, no matter how unlikely it seems, you are the most important person in all of fairy. Whosoever has you has power, and I want power. Because for her, she thinks that if she has more power, she has more security, and she will be safe and secure in this world. The most interesting thing about Jude and Cardan's dynamics and relationship to me is the fact that Cardan is all talk. He is very good with using his words, and he can manipulate others in the situations to benefit him by just using his words, whereas Jude is predominantly action. She will use her swordplay and her actions and, physically do things to get what she wants. And I think my favorite thing to think about is this interview that Holly Black had where she talks about how Cardan, talks up this, his talk like, oh, I'm so cruel, I'm so terrible. And Jude comes in now saying like, well, I killed someone, I'm terrible. He goes, whoa, I was joking. I was talking out my ass. Holly Black's annotation right here perfectly summarizes what's going on in this situation, which is Jude worked so hard to be as awful as she thought he was, not realizing she had far exceeded the mark. Basically, Jude thought that Cardan was cruel and terrible and doing these horrible things, doing it, but in actuality, it was just a mask and he was just talking out of his ass. But she thought he had set this bar and she went over this bar, not realizing that the bar was completely made up. Jude describes how Cardan let her tie him to a chair with only an odd look on his face, and I think in part it's him probably imagining her tying him up would have led to a different situation than the one that they are in now. But also, I think he's in disbelief. I think part of him knows not to trust her, but still kind of trusts her. Hoping that she is still noble and won't betray him and use him. And I think it's almost like a fool's hope right now. Once again, Jude views Cardan as the gatekeeper to this world because she says that having control of him was the only path to having some control over the fate of my world. Basically, she just kidnapped the gatekeeper that's preventing her from being accepted in Fairy. Cardan and Jude, once again, are more alike than they think because early on in the book, Jude said to Locke, no, I'm not playing the game of kings and queens. I'm just playing, I'm just pissing off people more powerful and eating the consequences, which is exactly what Cardan does too. He does it to Balkan and he's doing it now to Jude because he literally says with a smug look on his face, will you tell me where exactly we are now that I am trussed up to your satisfaction? And she's like, I just want to wipe that smug look off his face. He's terrified. He's scared. But this is his go-to reaction, as is with you. The thing about chapter 21 and chapter 22 is watching Cardan and Jude's perceptions of each other shatter. 21 was where Jude's perception of Cardan started to shatter a little bit, seeing him have emotions. Right now we're seeing it with Cardan. His belief that she is noble is starting to shatter with her holding a knife to his throat and then now learning that she was a spy for the brother that tried to get rid of him earlier on in his life. One of the things about the story is seeing people's expectations of others blinding them. So, for instance, people assume Cardan to be one way, and he uses that to his benefit to, help propel what he wants. He more so does in the next book. Same with, Jude. She eventually starts using the expectations of her being a human to her benefit, but she also is burned by it with Maddox because she assumes that his loyalty would outweigh his bloodthirstiness. She knows he's bloodthirsty, but she thought his loyalty to the crown would have been more powerful, and it wasn't. There's this little moment that I love because it's once again Jude misinterpreting something. It's when Cardan yawns and she wants to slap his face because she thinks he's bored of this conversation. But I think it's because he's trying to keep himself calm. It's his body reacting that way because I know for myself when I was a swimmer, I'd get very, nervous before a race and I would yawn a lot. And it was my body's way of calming it to stay level, to not panic. When Cardan is begging for his life after the ghost threatens to kill him, he says, no, I can tell you whatever you need to know about Balkan. I can lead you into the treasury if you want riches. I could be useful. It ends with that, and that is right there the core of him. His goal, his desire in his life, because he wants to be seen and he wants to be deemed useful. And that's exactly what Jude wants in this world too. When Cardan says Dane was despicable, Jude says, what do you mean despicable? I ask indignant, even with the steel healing wound on my hand. It's once again her viewing Dane almost like how she views Maddox. Both of them have done something terrible to her in her life. But they both offered her something in return. And so she justifies the ends for the means. The other similarity between Jude and Cardan is that they both preen when they're trying to prove that they're smarter, or in some cases for Jude, stronger than what other people think they are. others have such low expectations of the two of them that they're constantly trying to fight against it. And we see it here where Cardan like trying to prove why Dane is despicable, saying like, you know, he poisoned a child in his womb, poisoned her father, had her father turn against the other siblings. And the whole time Jude's describing Cardan's looking pleased with himself at surprising both Jude and the others. And it's because it's just Cardan trying to be like, don't count me out. I'm here and I'm useful. Well, Cardan accidentally just set the bar a little bit higher because right now Jude still thinks he's setting the bar. And as we know from the famous line, she says, if I cannot be better than them, then I will become so much worse. And right here, she says, how am I supposed to be worse than the folk after hearing, you know, Cardan's recount what Dane has done, what others have done in this court?